Hello and welcome to Panorama Consulting Group's webinar today. My name is Jennifer Oldemeyer and I'm going to be your host and moderator. Today I'll be chatting with some of the most knowledgeable minds in the world of ERP failure. We'll talk about what it looks like to recover a project that's headed for failure so you can start thinking about the course of your own project. This will be part of a three-part series where we dive deeper into project recovery and then talk about what happens if recovery doesn't work. We'll even touch on litigation. I'm actually going to stop sharing my slides and just focus on the conversation for now. I'd like to introduce two project recovery professionals from our software expert witness practice, Bill Bauman and Joe Ambrose. Could you both please introduce yourselves?
Sure, be happy to. My name's Bill Bauman. I've been in enterprise software, not only on the vendor side, but also on the client side for about 30 plus years now. I've been with Panorama 8 years. I'm actually going on 9. Worked in the delivery side, also in the sales side of the business, and have been in the practicing part of the expert witness division of our group for 7 years now. So I've got a large background in this area. And Joe, how about you?
Thank you, Bill. I've very similar to Bill. I've now over 30 years experience in all aspects of technology implementations, from organizational change to project management to actually working on the software side as an executive of a ERP reseller. So been in the expert witness arena about 7 to 8 years now. Been at Panorama almost 3 years now, and Bill and I head up the practice here to work with both clients and law firms, working on cases for both clients and also on the defendant side as well. So that's my experience, Bill. Pretty similar. Bill and I have been working together for quite some time as it relates to this as well. So,
all right, well, we'll turn it over to you, Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm sure there will be many questions about this subject matter, so you're invited to submit your questions in the questions panel, and we'll answer them at the end of the webinar. Joe, would you like to do an introduction of Panorama Consulting Group and our expert witness practice?
Sure. Thank you, Jennifer. So Panorama Consulting has been in the ERP selection and its implementation support and expert witness business for almost 20 years now. On the expert services side, we really have two major areas that we focus on. Number one is the project recovery. When we have clients calling us when projects, whether it be during the actual implementation phase or post-implementation, when things aren't just where they want it to be, maybe the software isn't up and running, we get a lot of calls and work with a lot of clients in helping to support and get that project back on track. And then the other major thing that we do in the expert witness group is actual litigation support. We work with both legal counsel from companies who may have a dispute and also with top law firms across the country and actually internationally when they are looking for an expert who can really kind of tell them what's going on in the enterprise software world, what happened on the project and the like. So we have two major pieces that we work on. And as you can see from the slide that Jennifer has here, it really covers a variety of different areas. So that's what we do at Panorama. These are the type of things that our clients are really reaching out to us. Bill, did I miss anything on this list? Is there anything else we need to talk about?
No, I think that's a good start. We'll go from there, and as we get into it a little more, I'll if I see anything that needs to be addressed, I'll be happy to do that.
Great. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about each one of them independently, and we'll talk a little bit about not only what it is and what are some of the things that we look for, but also how you can start thinking through, if you have a situation on this, how you can start thinking through what your next approach may be. So again, one of the things that I'm going to just start a little bit on the project recovery side So on the active implementation side, what we see a lot is, projects are just taking longer than promised. They may have signed up with a software implementer for a 6-month implementation, and it's 9 months or a year in, a year and a half. They still don't have it up and running. They may start getting in a little bit of a conflict with their implementation partner. What we see a lot of times, it's not necessarily one or the other's fault. It's just for some reason the project isn't going as planned. So some of the things that we try and recommend is, hey, let's just take a step back. And sometimes it makes sense just from an outside perspective to come in and see what's happening. And some of the things that we look at there and we help clients with is we'll do an assessment. Generally, we'll look at the project management. Are things running? Do you have a good, solid project management methodology? Are you tracking changes to the project? Are you tracking, issues that pop up to the project? Are they getting resolved in a timely manner? Those types of things. A lot of things that we see could be around KPI management, really trying to understand how are you evaluating success in the different areas of this project. Are you really monitoring that, or should you be monitoring that? That's another delay that we sometimes see. And then, obviously budget is always a big issue in a lot of these is, we're starting to overrun budgets. Maybe you end up changing the scope midstream. Maybe you didn't count on doing that, but what does that look like from an active implementation? And we have a lot of different examples. And Bill, maybe you can talk about one or two, and I can bring up some examples of sort of what our clients have asked for, or what we see, and maybe some ways that we kind of geared them towards a solution.
Yeah, Joe, actually, my hand was raised. You couldn't see that because of my yellow hand.
No.
Any rate, it kind of reminded me of one of the municipalities we worked with. It was put in a HRIS, a human resource system, and they were actually in process when they came to us. And the problem was that there were a lot of disagreements between the vendor and the client. When they looked, or when we actually kind of took a look at, from a high level perspective, the scope of work was very ambiguous, which tends to cause a lot of confusion. There was no clear roles and responsibilities that were outlined in that statement of work. And frankly, the leadership from both the vendor and the municipality just wasn't that strong. They weren't that involved in the project. So, this actually resulted in delays in terms of decision making, and of course the progress of the project itself. Communication was kind of blurred at best, and there was a lot of frustration and dissatisfaction with the team members. So again, the municipality called us in. They said, "Hey, can you help us figure out what happened? Where did this thing break down?" So we wanted to bring the parties together and see if we could come to an agreement on a go-forward plan, because right now they were stalled and they weren't live yet. So what we ended up doing was we spoke to the both sides, as well as the vendor. In this case, there was a system integrator as well as a software vendor. So we talked to all three of them, and we were basically able to help break down the animosity that had built out, because being a third party, we're be able to be quite frank about where the issues lied. So we developed a plan to get it back on track, and ultimately the system was implemented and put on. Granted, it was over budget and it was late, but the whole point was they didn't have to throw the software out and all the time they'd invested and start over again. So it was a good outcome to a situation that could have been a lot worse.
Yeah, and that's I do remember that situation, Bill. And I think one important thing that we didn't touch on yet is the organizational change management piece, which we have a practice there at Panorama. It's built into all our methodology, either on the selection side or on the implementation support side, or even the expert witness side of the house. But in these projects, what happens in the situation you're talking about, Bill, his name is Bill, not Bob, is the organization kind of was starting to give up on what was going on. And that's where the change management piece comes in. How do you keep the momentum? The hardest thing on these ERP projects, it's a lot of work. A lot of people are doing 2 jobs that are on the project team. In order for this to go smoothly, you have to keep the momentum going. And that's why organizational change management is just a huge piece of this. Hey,
Joe, sorry to interrupt, but our the people that are here listening to this podcast, I think they'd be really interested to know what are the key elements that cause implementation failure. In our experience over the years, what's the number one thing that comes up when you see, okay, bad implementation? What comes up almost 95% plus of the time?
Yeah, organizational change management is, and if you do some industry reading, you may see that change management is a big issue, but we find that 100% too. Managing the change in this is the number one issue with these projects. And it might not be the initial cause, but it's the resulting cause. If your project management is falling behind, your schedules are falling behind, that all impacts the organizational change management of the project. So without question, managing the organizational change is the number one issue.
Thank you.
Any other examples you can think of for active implementations, Bill, or do you want to move on to a recovery?
Well, I could if you want. I mean, I got a million of them, but yeah, I'm thinking of when there was a professional services organization. It was in the accounting world that was putting in a project management system, because you imagine, because they're professional services, they're project based. So what happened was the management support for the project was really great up front, but as the project progressed, the longer it went on, that started to wane, and the client basically just didn't have sufficient resources for the project. You typically want to put your 18 players on a project of this size, but they were constantly being pulled back into doing production and running the business, which makes complete sense, but it was really a problem. So they didn't backfill these core team members. One of the things that when we get involved on the other side of the house in implementation is we always recommend that there is some kind of backfill for your core team guys people that are going to be involved in the project, because they're going to be doing two jobs at once. They can't do that. So in this particular case, what happened when all these problems started occurring was that the system integrator was the one that said, time out, we can't go any further. Until you guys get this straightened out, there's no sense moving. So, of course, the project fell behind schedule, and the client, frankly, pointed at the SI and said, the system integrator, and said, hey, man, you're not managing this project correctly. Frankly, that wasn't the problem. But at any rate, we were called in, frankly, by the system integrator in this case to provide implementation oversight of the project. So we were getting involved in the weekly status meetings. We were making sure the deliverables were the quality needed to be, and also to make sure they were complying, both sides, with the project milestones dictated by the statement of work. The end result was the project got restarted. They were, in this particular case, they were able to come in budget, but they were 4 months late. But hey, that's pretty good considering where they were. And we were actually asked to stay around and enact one of our post-go-live audit plans to make sure they were realizing the performance metrics that they had put in place that were going to drive the return on investment they expected for the project. So that one was a good ending to a situation that was pretty bad at the time.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out, Bill, as you've been discussing some of the different projects and different clients that we work with, is they don't always have happy endings, and we get the sooner you anticipate or see some of these issues going off the rail, the better you are, right? The longer you wait, if it was a 6-month implementation and you're 2 years in now, it gets harder and harder to try and get that result that you're looking for. Which I'm going to just move on to the next part of that, which is, sometimes we have clients and you have situations, forget the clients we work with, you may have the situations where we're up and live, we're up and running now, but things just aren't working. We're still having maybe some system issues. We might have some adoption issues from some of the folks. There's a lot of different things that can happen. I think one of the big issues that we see way too much is clients are so happy that they're finally done with the project and it's up and running that they feel the project's over at go live, and it's not over at go live. And that's one of the biggest issues. It's like, okay, great, we cut the old system off, now we're up and running. You really have to have a plan, and we always like to say it's implementation plus 1 year. The project ends a year after the initial implementation. You got to continue to start, and really put in some success measures along the way, which is something you should do before you start the implementation. But how are you going to measure success on the post-implementation side? And those are some important issues. Again, Bill, do we have any situations you want to talk about or that we can bring up as it relates to post go live recovery?
I'm going to go with my analog version of raising my hand now because
There
I'm
it
kind
is.
of an
I
old
see
school
it this
guy.
time.
So
I see
I'm
it.
raising my hand. What I was going to say was you used the word adoption when you were talking just a minute ago. One of the things, and I think you'd support this, that we see, again, this comes back to organizational change management. I hate to sound like a broken record, but this is really one of the issues. Organizational change management, if you don't put that in place, you already mentioned it, people can go live and the system can actually be running perfectly, but if the users don't use it and they go back to their spreadsheets and their access databases and all those things, you've just put in a really expensive system and you're back in the same processes that occurred before. So again, ensuring that the users adopt the system can be one of the biggest problems. That's got nothing to do with the software itself or even the processes. It's just the users didn't see the need for it, and they didn't feel the commitment from management to say, hey, we're behind this and you guys need to get on board and do this project. So again, we've seen that a number of times.
Yeah, and I'm going to say again, and that's a really good example, Bill, it's the onus is on the leadership team to build those success measures and to help drive that and to continue to communicate, with the organization and how well we're doing. Again, go live a lot of times, unfortunately, is we're up and running, let's get going, but there's no way to measure it. And the executive team really needs to have those organizational measures that they can drive their team to, right? To say, this is how we're going to know successful with this implementation and stay involved in the project. And again, it's not just go live and we're done, really continuing with that communication and that leadership until, you've met your organizational goals for this software implementation. So it's really important to continue. There's a lot and, we have limited time here, so we're not going to go through all of them. And we do have our other webinar. We'll talk a little bit deeper about some of the project recovery. This is meant to kind of touch on a few different areas. So I'm going to move over to Bill, if you don't mind. I move over to the litigation support side.
I do have a question before we move on to there.
Sure. Go ahead.
So it sounds like you can do, or you have done project recovery at any stage of the project, both before go live and after go live. Is that true?
That's correct. Yeah. And we've done a variety of different things. Again, it's really when the client is really feeling the pain of, hey, we need to get somebody in here. I mean, generally it comes when they start falling behind in the project, starting to go over budgets, during implementation, start missing deadlines. But then post recovery, again, they thought everything was okay at go live, but they're not getting the results they're looking for, maybe from a technical, maybe from a process, maybe from a people adoption side. So we have literally seen the entire gamut from, implementation to many months after implementation.
What that reminds me of, Joe, is we did have a client that came to us, and the thing was not completely off track. I mean, it had its problems, but the client realized that they weren't able to resolve the issues with the system integrator, and they came to us prior to the things just completely blowing up, and we were able to get them back on track by going through the statement of work and the implementation plan and get them back on track earlier in the process than to the point that a lot of people come to us when it's already completely blown up and both sides are fighting with each other and making claims and all that. So again, you don't want to pull the trigger too quick, but on the other hand, sometimes you just need to get somebody outside, a third party that doesn't have a vested interest in one situation or the other, that can be very direct and honest about it. Frankly, some of those situations we play the bad cop. We're the ones that are saying, hey, Mr. Client, you need to get your resources in line, and you, Mr. System Integrator, you've got to put the right resources on this product and get it going. Now, that typically results in them not liking us, both groups not liking us, but it's better they don't like us because we're going to go away. They've got to like each other, right? Because they're going to be together for the next 5-10 years. It's much better if we're the guys that are making the demands than if they've got to do that themselves. So sometimes it's almost like marriage therapy. Like you're you're an enabler to help them,
Yeah.
communicate and get things done.
Yeah, agreed. Sometimes these don't have to be big, gigantic projects on our end. Sometimes it's just getting them back on track. So, I'm sorry, Jennifer, do you have another question before we move down?
No, we can move on. Litigation.
Yeah. So again, we'll cover this in webinar 3 in greater detail, but just as a summary, I mean, sometimes it's too late. And we do have an entire practice that specializes in just, hey, litigation support. And we have a couple different things that we talk about here. One is an actual assessment. And we work with both clients that are not seeking external counsel at this point. Maybe it's internal counsel. Maybe it's just an executive from the company that's saying, hey, we got some issues here. We just want an outside perspective if we can salvage this thing. And then on the other hand, we work directly with some of the, top law firms in the country that are looking for experts in, ERP implementation, assessment, selection, which is what the other side of our company does full time. So some of the things that we see, and again, we're just going to kind of touch on it today, is, can't you salvage this thing? Because it's always better to try and salvage it if you can. You've made significant investments in time, people, resources, a new direction. Most of the time these software projects, I mean, all of the time, are geared towards some type of 3 to 5 to 10-year plan and where the organization's going. So it's no small thing to all of a sudden stop the project and either retrench back to your old software or start over. So we work in a variety of different ways here. Again, we've got the assessment stage where it's, pre-litigation. Sometimes then if we're actually working with a law firm or an individual company, it's like, hey, we've got litigation going on now. We need some help and support with that. So that's like the initial assessment phase, and we'll get back to this. Oh, Bill's got his hand up. So wait a minute. Go ahead, Bill.
Sorry, I
can't see your hand. It's really small on the screen.
My hand is big as
you got to do this.
That's my kids. They know.
Okay.
Anyway, so, when you were talking about determining what the situation is, I think of one of our offerings, which we kind of have a common term, we call it the go, no go assessment. In particular, I'm thinking about a nonprofit organization we had. They were in, or they still are in, human services, but they had a troubled implementation. They were trying to put in a fundraising system, and again, they just weren't making any of the deliverable dates. Nothing was going the way it needed to go. They'd essentially consumed the entire budget for the implementation. They were only about halfway through. So one of the things that turned up was that there was some functionality that was demonstrated in the software demonstration that wasn't in the current system. And so there was some questions about, does that really exist? What happened from this? Of course, both sides in senior management started pointing fingers at each other and going after each other, particularly with regard to this functionality that, they were saying, well, you showed us this thing, where is it? That resulted in the project, bang, they called a halt to it. And both sides were starting to, decide if, how much did this thing really cost us? The system integrator obviously had invested a lot of time and they weren't getting paid. The client was saying, hey, my opportunity costs are huge. I've lost all kinds of revenue from the fundraising that I wasn't able to do. And so that was pretty much the NPO, the nonprofit, that called us in and they said, hey, can you kind of figure out where we are, determine what's going on with the implementation? And, we came in and we had to determine the validity of this nonprofit's claims. I mean, were the things they saying, were they legitimate? Or were these just things that people kind of said, well, I think this cost us a lot of money. Well, what did it really cost you? And then what they really wanted from us as far as an end deliverable was, should we litigate or not? Now, Joe, you'd be the first one to say that we're not attorneys, and we're not. We don't give legal opinions, but we can tell a client if, hey, you've got there are enough issues here in terms of what are best practices within the industry that seem to have been violated. The agreements look, there's things that you would normally see in there that may not be there. Again, not from a legal perspective, but from a best practice perspective. So that's what we did with these guys. it turned out that the claims that this nonprofit had are not only accurate, but they were pretty much true throughout everything they claimed. The vendor has shown functionality in a demo that wasn't available in the GA. We call the general release of the software, and so that's not an atypical thing, unfortunately. But the sales function has to call that out and say, hey, if we're showing you something that's not in the current version that's running out there in the cloud, we need to tell you that up front, which unfortunately they had not done. The resulting or the result of the project was we told them, hey man, you might have a case here, and so they wanted to find an attorney that had this kind of background. Fortunately, we work with a lot of them, so we happen to recommend 3. Again, we're not attorneys, we can't do that. We have no financial arrangement with any of these guys, but it was just, hey, here's some people that do this type of work. So, I think that go, no go, again, for a lot of people that are saying, hey, I'm not sure how bad this is, but I'd really like to know if there's any kind of basis for going to, mediation even. Anyway, I just thought of that when you were talking there.
Yeah, and I have another case real quick too. That just recently, if you recall, a pretty large municipality, the executive sponsors on the project, things just weren't going well, or it was taking longer than anticipated. Actually, when we took a deeper dive for them, and they wanted to know how well are we doing on our side of the house, or is there something we're doing wrong, or is it something that the implementer is doing wrong? And after not a very long period of time, we were able to identify numerous things that the municipality was doing that was really setting the project off track significantly. So it was actually on them. And what that said to the municipality executives and leaders of the sponsors of the project is, this isn't necessarily a software issue, our partner issue, it's our issue. And we need to get better internally. So that's what some of these go, no go, or pre-litigation assessments, we can call them a couple different things. We've seen a variety of different things. I think the important thing to consider, on your end as a company that's going through this is it worth it to go to litigation? Is it worth it? Do we need somebody to come in and help us understand where we are? The only thing I can say from our experience is the longer you go off track and the longer you keep staying off track without questioning and really evaluating your project success measures on a regular basis, it's just harder and harder to get back on track. So any other thoughts on the pre-assessment, Bill? I'm going to move on to some of the litigation support just briefly.
No, I think that's a good place to go.
So again, finally, sometimes we just have, we're working with attorneys. We know it's a case. It's no longer a if then or go, no go. And we provide a lot of different things as an expert. Again, expert analysis and reports. We'll spend a lot of time with, looking at the case from inside out. We literally dissect the case from the beginning to the end and really try and understand what's being claimed by both parties and coming in and saying, here's what we see. And this could be everything from the initial contracts through what was said in the sales process, as Bill said before, all the way to how's the project's being managed, from the project management principles and methodology to the, are there change requests on the projects, looking at testing and testing logs and issues, and in some cases, emails that were made promises going back and forth. But we'll take a look at the entire thing and put together an analysis or a report that could be for an arbitration, or it may eventually go to trial. I mean, we do help with them with depositions. So a lot of times we'll say, hey, I think maybe you should be talking to person A, B, and C. We need to get more information on that. They should have a good understanding of what that looks like. And then a lot of times, when it goes to trial, we'll actually sit on the bench, like you see it on just about every one of these Law and Order episodes that's been on. There's always that expert that gets beat up sitting on the bench. Because of our expertise in this, that's why a lot of law firms look at us. So, they feel real confident us being an expert that what we're saying is actually what we believe. So go ahead, Bill. Hey, Bill's got his hand up.
I got my hand up again.
I saw your hand this time.
Yeah, well, there you go. Hey, I was just thinking about this in terms of pre-litigation. Again, I may be a few minutes late here, but
Oh, you're
you
catching
know,
up.
you don't always have to go to getting an actual testifying expert if you want to kind of understand where you are. And I'm thinking of, we had this medical device manufacturer. They were having a failed implementation. There was a ton of turnover. Frankly, there was no change management plan, which we already talked about. But of course, this ended up in disruptions in the implementation. Data was mishandled, deadlines, the whole thing. The point being here that we were brought in and asked to be a consultant, a technical consultant in this situation to kind of look at the situation and determine where things were. So rather than in going through the expense of a testifying expert, which is not an inexpensive thing, we were able to come in as an expert consultant and take a look at where the failures occurred, and then we generated a report to the client and just said, hey, here's where you sit. So it wasn't a case of they were, this was post go live, by the way. There was stuff that had, when I say go live, there was a go live, but it was an incomplete go live. So, but they wanted to know where the failures were and what happened. Again, we used one of our consulting experts as opposed to one of our testifying experts. So it's just a way of, we try to match what the requirements of the client are to the folks that we have, and there's quite a few of them that have experience doing this. So again, it provides the most economical solution to get the client what it is their objective is. So anyway, sorry, just came up to my mind.
No, that's good, Bill. I think, the purpose of our initial webinar here was to give you kind of an overview of the two different areas. As we continue on the next two webinars, we're going to talk in greater detail in each of these two different areas. But I think the important thing to summarize, what we've gone through here today is, projects go off track. And the earlier you can identify when you need somebody else to come in and take a look at that, or how do you need to start reevaluating if your project's on the right track, the better. The goal is, and the least expensive goal is to try and get this project back on track. When things go bad, there's a lot of things you need to know from a litigation perspective to see if you even have a case. Do I have a case going forward or the like? So one of the things we're trying to do today is give you a little bit of an overview. Hopefully your project's on track. Hopefully you're just watching this for educational purposes. But the goal of the next two webinars is to take each of these two categories and break them down a little bit deeper and hopefully give you some more tips to help you in case you're in that situation. So, Jennifer, I think now we were going to break and see if we had some questions, correct?
Yeah, I did have one quick question for you just on my part. Do you recommend that clients or organizations record meetings with vendors so someone, in case something does go south, that someone can come in and really assess what was said, right? Just make sure you record all meetings. Is that a good best practice?
Well, that's a legal question. I guess any type of documentation, whether it be emails, whether it be recorded webinars, keeping that information. One of the things that we didn't describe today, we'll talk a lot more later, is as part of our litigation, we go back and look at emails and anything that's recorded. Unfortunately, it may not be in the contract, or it may not even be in the project plan, but it might be in an email from one person or the other. It might be a recorded webinar. So I'm not sure, it can never hurt from that practice, but just know that if things do go south, anything that you have is something that we're going to want to leverage to be able to build the case. Bill, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say a couple things. One of which is if you're going to record something, you certainly want to get someone's permission. There are some states that don't require that, but I would say if you want to have a good working relationship with somebody, you ought to tell them that you're going to record things before you do that. That's a fairly critical thing. As Joe just mentioned, in the legal world, they call it the discovery process. So, if you do end up in litigation or mediation and, there's a discovery process, anything you've got that wasn't, if it's a recorded conversation, if it's an email, if it's any kind of documentation, that can be discoverable and that can end up on the screen in front of a whole courtroom. So I can tell you the number of times we've seen some really disparaging emails,
Oh, yeah.
internal emails. They're not talking to the outside; they're internal. They are part of the discovery process, and they can be very damaging. So
Yeah.
you need to be careful. Again, when you start running into trouble, start thinking about, wow, what would happen if somebody saw what I'm about to write? And you might be better off picking up the phone if you're going to say something that you wish doesn't ever appear out in court.
No, that's a great point. We have a couple cases right now where, again, the company purchasing the software made some damning internal discoverable discussions among project leaders and project team members that weren't didn't look good for them as it went forward. So the case is on the way to settlement because of it. So to your point, be very careful. Any other questions that are out there, Jennifer?
Yeah, I have some attendee questions here. When you were talking about assessing the health of a project, you mentioned 3 or 4 different types of assessments. Are all these separate projects?
I could take a first stab at this, Bill, and let you
Sure,
comment
please,
as well.
go do. Feel free.
It really depends on the level of involvement. Sometimes when we talk about it and what the client is looking to accomplish, sometimes when we talk about just an initial assessment, that could be very quick. It could be, hey, can you just take a quick look and here's a few things. Tell us what you think from that perspective. Where sometimes the project is much bigger, much farther down the road, and there's a significant issues where we have to not only dig in, but we may play a different role. We may end up coming in in more of a project oversight role, because the project is off track to that extent. So it really depends on the level of complexity and the type of project. What we do, though, is this doesn't. We could have very little involvement to a significant involvement. So there's different types of offerings. Just to point out that sometimes it doesn't have to be an animal of a project. It can be something relatively quickly that we can come in and do. So it really depends on the client need. Bill, did I say that good, or is there something else that you'd like to add?
You said that so well, Joe.
Thank you very much.
However, I am going to add one thing,
Beautiful.
just because I need to.
Yeah.
When we're talking about different varieties of assessment, the one that, because we've been hammering on this, would be an OCM assessment. Again, if your system's running, the system technically is correct, the process was correct, but there's been lack of adoption or things like that. That's when an OCM assessment may be enough work to be able to determine where the problem lies. So each one of those assessments, again, you select them based upon what type of situation you're in. What are the claims? What are the problems you're experiencing? Because, again, in some cases, you may not need to do a full project review or project management review. The problem wasn't in project management. The problem was in, lack of training or whatever it happened to be. So, again, we would select those different assessments based upon what the individual case dictated.
Yeah, that sounds right, Bill. I think you filled in the gaps there. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have another question here. I'm not sure about the differences between project verification and validation and project oversight. What are they?
Well, that's a good question. Bill, did you want to start, or did you want me to start?
Well, I can start. I mean, typically in the public sector, there's a thing called IVV, Independent Verification and Validation. That is something that most public sector large implementations have in place. It's a requirement where let's call it a third-party auditor for lack of better terminology, but they come in and they're basically making sure that everything's being done, that all the goals are being met before payments are released, that, the deliverables are good and things have been done. That's, a very formal role. Now, other types of situations, clients have come to us and said, hey, we just want to make sure someone's watching us. It's kind of like an insurance policy. We want you to just kind of, make sure things are going the right way. Now, if it's a little more formal, again, where we're going to come in and actually look into the specific deliverables, look into the conference room pilot results, look into the different testing and things that went on, that's more like a verification and a validation, or validation verification, excuse me. When someone says, hey, Panorama, or, it could be another group too. Obviously, there's other people that do this. They say, we'd like you to just come in and, help us make sure that this implementation, again, goes as smoothly as possible. That we're acting more as an advisor. We stay at a fairly high level. We're attending status meetings. We're obviously talking to folks, but our involvement may be 2-4 hours a week. It's not a large requirement to do that. And that's pretty much, it's about time and the level of detail you get into that delineates the difference between the V&V portion and an advisory, at least from my perspective. Joe, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's 100%. We do, probably 20% of our client work is in the government sector. So we do a lot of work with different municipalities, state, local, federal. So that is much more, that's a much more structured product offering that they're actually requesting by name. To your point, in the private sector, that name, the IVMV isn't something we generally hear. We hear more of, can you come help us with some type of oversight or the like? So I agree. I think generally the oversight can be defined much differently and is much less structured than an IVMV program.
What else do you have there, Jennifer?
We have time for one more. So
Okay.
let's say you do this go, no-go analysis, and it turns out you recommend to go. We still have the same issues as before. How do we get those resolved?
Yeah, so the go, no-go decision from a litigation perspective, generally that's where, we'll do an initial evaluation and say, well, here's the 8 to 10 things that you're trying to claim in your complaint. We're having a hard time supporting more than maybe 1 or 2 of them. In that case, you may want to, our suggestion is you've got 10 issues, we can support 2, the other 8 we can't. So in that situation, we're never making that end decision for the client, but obviously there's a contrary to that as well. You may have 8 or 10 key issues in your complaint. We can support just about all of them after our initial assessment. Then we would recommend, hey, I think you should move forward with this. I think what you're claiming seems to make sense against industry standard based on our expertise. It looks like you may have a legitimate claim. Bill, anything else?
Yeah, Joe, I think, you used the word complaint. And so, complaint typically is you've got an attorney involved because you're filing a complaint, right? There's something being, put into the court system. There are other situations where people come to us and just go, should I even look at it talking to an attorney? Right. So you kind of have both. You have the one where, you've got an attorney. The attorney says, I got a complaint, and they're looking for somebody to validate that stuff legit, where you can say, okay, continue to go on the path of litigation, or should I even think about litigation? And then, again, we see both situations have come up, numerous times because, again, as you mentioned right at the beginning, Joe, litigation is expensive. Let's just face it. You can end up spending more on the litigation than the whole claim is. So,
right.
You got to make sure it's really worth the time and also the opportunity cost, right? You're going to drag your company through a lot of stuff. People are going to get called in for depositions. All kinds of stuff happens. So there's a lot of costs that aren't even hard costs that are kind of sunk costs that are going to get expended if, you're going to go down that route. So you just want to make sure you're as informed as possible. Again, we're not giving you legal opinions. We're giving you from the industry perspective. Does this look like something that was done correctly, or were there serious flaws in it? And that's what the opinion we're expressing.
Yeah, thanks for that, Bill. That's exactly right. It's either a formal complaint with these 8 different things we're claiming, or it's informal that may turn into a complaint. Here's the 8 or 9 things we'd like to be able to state, which would be, prior to that. So that's a good catch, Bill. It's exactly the same. Is that the last question we have, Jennifer?
Yeah, that's all time we have.
Okay.
I'll conclude with another plug for Panorama Consulting Group. Please visit their website to learn more about getting your ERP project back on track, regardless of the challenges you're facing. And thank you, Joe and Bill, and to our audience. I hope everyone has a great rest of the day.
Wait, I want a shameless plug because my name's up there. I think if these folks need any more information, they should call me because my number's up there in my name. But hey, if you want to talk to Joe, that's okay too. You can get him at the same number.
Yeah. Bill and I are connected at the hip on these, so there's very little that we don't know about any case that comes to the door. So Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Have a great day.